January 18th, 1945, Eastern Germany. The war was almost over. The prisoners knew it, the guards knew it. But inside Stalag 9C, mercy was still considered treason. Corporal Wilhelm Adler stood watch in the snow, rifle slung over his shoulder, breath rising in white clouds against the gray sky. Beyond the barbed wire, hundreds of Allied prisoners shuffled between barracks, thin, hollow-eyed, wrapped in whatever scraps they could find. The Red Army was pushing west. American bombers roared overhead almost daily. Germany was collapsing from the outside in. And inside the camp, men were starving. Official rations had been cut again. Supplies barely reached German soldiers at the front, let alone prisoners. The camp commandant made it clear, they are the enemy, we owe them nothing. But Adler had begun to see something different. He was 27. Before the war, he had been a school teacher in Dresden. He joined the Wehrmacht in 1940, not out of fanaticism, but because every able-bodied man was expected to serve. By 1943, he was deemed unfit for frontline combat after shrapnel tore through his shoulder in Ukraine. Instead of returning home, he was reassigned, guard duty at a prisoner of war camp. It was meant to be safer, simpler. It wasn't. The prisoners arrived in waves. British pilots, American infantrymen, occasionally Soviet soldiers transferred from other camps. They entered defiant, hopeful, sometimes angry. Over months, hunger reshaped them. So did winter. Adler watched them deteriorate. He noticed the way they split crusts of bread into equal pieces, the way they carried their weakest between barracks, the way they still saluted one another out of habit, even in rags. One night in early December, he saw a prisoner collapse near the wire. Regulations were strict. No unnecessary contact, no conversations, no assistance without command approval. The man didn't get up. Other guards laughed. One less to feed.
Adler walked over anyway. The prisoner's name, he later learned, was Private Thomas Bennett from Manchester. Feverish, starving, frostbite spreading across his toes. Adler faced a choice. Follow the rules and let the system decide the man's fate, or intervene and risk being accused of aiding the enemy. He returned to the guard hut, opened his personal ration tin, and removed half of his bread and sausage. He waited until patrol rotation shifted. Then he approached the wire. "Do not speak," he whispered in halting English. He pushed the food through a gap where the fencing sagged near a wooden post. Bennett stared at him in disbelief. "Eat." It was the first time Adler crossed the invisible line between guard and prisoner. It would not be the last. Helping one man was one thing. Helping many was another. Over the following weeks, Adler began quietly altering inventory records. A crate marked as containing 40 loaves might be logged as 38. A sack of potatoes could spoil on paper while being redistributed at night. He was careful, meticulous. He knew that discovery meant court-martial, possibly execution. The German High Command had issued harsh directives against fraternization or sympathy with enemy captives. But as the war deteriorated, oversight loosened. Officers were distracted. Supplies were chaotic. Records blurred. Adler used that chaos. He recruited no one, told no one. The fewer who knew, the safer everyone remained. At night, when snow muted sound, he approached sections of fencing he had quietly loosened. Sometimes he passed bread, sometimes blankets, once medicine stolen from the infirmary.
The prisoners began to notice patterns. They never spoke his name. They never acknowledged him openly. But when he walked past during daylight inspections, he sometimes saw the faintest nods, gestures small enough to be mistaken for habit. By January 1945, rumors flooded the camp. The Russians were less than 100 kilometers away. German units were retreating. Some guards spoke of evacuating the prisoners westward, forced marches through freezing temperatures. Everyone knew what that meant. Prisoners in other camps had died by the thousands during evacuations. Exhaustion, exposure, gunfire for those who fell behind. Adler overheard officers discussing preparations. "We cannot leave them for the Russians," one lieutenant said. "Orders are clear." That night, Adler didn't sleep. If the prisoners were marched, many would not survive. He had seen their condition: malnourished, weak, frostbitten. He made the most dangerous decision. of his life.
On January 28, Adler unlocked Barracks 3 under the pretense of inspection. Inside were British and American NCOs, men who maintained internal order among prisoners. In quiet German-accented English, he spoke rapidly. "You will not march. Hide. When evacuation begins, break into the coal cellar behind the storage shed. Stay there 2 days. Do not come out." They stared at him. "If you are found," one British sergeant asked, "what happens to you?" Adler did not answer. He locked the door and walked away. 2 days later, evacuation orders were issued. Hundreds of prisoners were assembled. But confusion erupted when Soviet artillery was heard in the distance. Officers panicked. Some guards fled, others burned documents. In the chaos, Barracks 3 appeared partially empty. Officers assumed prisoners had been transferred earlier or miscounted in paperwork. Nearly 60 men hid beneath the coal cellar, a space Adler had quietly unlocked the previous evening. The march left without them. 2 days later, Soviet troops overran the camp. They found the hidden prisoners, weak but alive. They also found Adler. He did not run.
When Soviet soldiers stormed the guard quarters, they lined up remaining German personnel. Some were beaten, others taken prisoner. One British prisoner, Thomas Bennett, stepped forward and pointed at Adler. "This one," he said in Russian through a translator, "is not like the others." Several prisoners corroborated the claim. It likely saved Adler's life. After the war, records of Stalag 9C were incomplete. Many documents had burned. The camp commandant disappeared during the final days. Some guards faced trials, others blended into the ruins of post-war Germany. Adler returned to Dresden in late 1946. He resumed teaching. He rarely spoke about the camp. Years later, in 1962, he received a letter from England. Inside was a photograph, a group of men standing outside a small pub. On the back were the words, "To the guard who remembered we were human." There were no medals, no public recognition, no official commendations. History did not record his name among heroes, but 60 men who hid in a coal cellar during the winter of 1945 survived because a guard chose conscience over command. War divides the world into uniforms and allegiances. It simplifies morality into sides. But sometimes, humanity survives in the quietest rebellions. A loaf of bread passed through wire, a blanket left where it could be found, a door unlocked at the right moment. Corporal Wilhelm Adler was not a general, not a resistance fighter, not a celebrated defector. He was a guard, and in a system built to dehumanize, he chose repeatedly to see the prisoners not as enemies, but as men. The war ended in May 1945. Most people remember the battles. Few remember the guard who secretly helped his prisoners survive long enough to see peace.